Welcome back to another episode of Living LFTD. Brenton Ross. We're on episode 3.
Here we go.
A very special guest with me today, Joshua Ward. I have a little intro on you that doesn't do it justice whatsoever, and then I'll let you kind of take away or remove any of these, but I think they're all appropriate. Josh is an entrepreneur, which was unique about that is his entrepreneurial efforts are also tied to being a philanthropist. So would you consider yourself, like, I think most people, when they think of philanthropist, they think of somebody that just makes money and then gives money, but you actually run an organization. Would you call it?
I mean, they came up with, this wasn't even my word. My predecessor came up with this word, philanthropreneurship.
Philanthropreneurship, I like it. So you heard that first.
Yeah.
I heard that first here, philanthropreneurship. That's solid. You're a husband. You're a new father.
Indeed.
Definitely a world traveler. Mountain biker. That's actually, I would say mountain biking, like you and I had hung out in the sense of having conversations and stuff, and you come for a couple workouts at my gym. But that was like the first thing that you and I ever like just went and did together.
It was like the place to chill and clear our heads.
I haven't been on mine in a while. Have you still been riding yours?
Mine right now has a flat back tire.
Mine are always flat. I air them up and thankfully they last long enough for the ride, but mine go flat overnight every time. I even have the green slime stuff in it.
Yep.
And it's still deflating on me, but it holds air for my ride, and then it goes flat overnight.
Well, we got to get that fixed up and get back up.
I've been thinking about selling, because I have 2. I've been thinking about selling the one I got from REI, the gray one that I put the orange handles on.
Yep.
Because that one is newer, and I like the way it looks better, and it's more comfortable, but I'm actually faster on the old one. And the old one's cheaper. So I'm thinking about just selling the new one, and then I still need a bike because I want to go on bike rides with my little girl. And speaking of that, I have my phone for 2 purposes. I've already said this in the first 2 episodes. You would think we'd have a baby by now, but it's literally any minute. So I need to make sure that I'm ready to head over there and pick up my wife if I get that call right now to go deliver our next baby girl. But also, I have my notes here too. And then let me ask you, am I missing anything there that you would put in that list?
I mean, I think maybe the most important part is Christ follower.
Absolutely. Yeah. I put that in. I think they're going to figure that out for their own, just listening to you talk through this conversation. Uniquely, they've already picked up on your accent, I'm sure, which is beautiful.
Ain't from around these parts.
Yeah. Now, you were born in South Africa, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So being born there, just kind of pick up there. What was your childhood like?
Okay, so first of all, thanks for bringing me in, man. It's
Absolutely,
awesome to get time with you. So,
yes.
Born in South Africa, but born to a Swazi family. So Swaziland's this tiny country that borders South Africa and Mozambique, for those of you who've never met me. Brenton, you know all of this already. But with my family living in Swaziland, now called Eswatini, just the medical care system was better in South Africa at the time. And so parents went through, had me there, and a few days later brought me home to Eswatini. Eswatini is this beautiful country of 1.2 million people. It's a bit of a time capsule because you have this ancient practice and way of life in the Swazi traditions and cultures held together within the context of us being a kingdom. And so we still have a king who is in complete control of the country. It's actually a democratically elected king. So we're grateful to have His Majesty, and the throne passes through his bloodline. Very different life experience there.
A little bit.
Very, very positive in terms of peaceful African nation, beautiful people, culture of honor, a real respect for the personhood of each other. We'll get to it more later, but really personhood being between men. There's low regard for women, unfortunately. It's a polygamous culture, so
it still is.
Yeah, still is. So His Majesty has, I think, 15 wives at the time of this recording.
No kidding.
And and anybody in Eswatini, part of the Swazi tribe, can have as many wives as they can afford. And so women become more of a possession than a person. And so that's part of the degradation of human value in terms of ladies in our society. But I grew up in this awesome family, ministry family. And, people here call me a mission kid, a pastor's kid. For us, I'm not a mission kid because it was my home.
Yeah.
It just was ministry. So
what was that like? I mean, obviously there's the mission component of it, but just like, what was the everyday life like for you, for it to be home, to be normal, to be a normal kid at that time?
Oh, yeah. I guess it's not normal here, but normal there. We would interact on a daily basis with a child who had just been abandoned, or maybe an 11-year-old girl whose parents had died and she had to be the mother to her 2 siblings. And then social welfare would bring this child to us, the family unit, so the 3 kids. Let's say the archetype case here is an 11-year-old girl, a 6-year-old brother, and a 2-year-old sister. So these 3 kids come into our care after being a child-led home, and you just learn to live together. So you've got that level of care where there's trauma and a lot of trauma-based care that happens in a family orphan care environment. And then because we were looking after orphan and vulnerable kids, still are today, we have lots of visitors come from around the world, and people with a lot of resourcing oftentimes. So dealing with those who have nothing and those who have, materially at least speaking, in the world's eyes, everything, and just learning to see God at work in both.
I don't want to skip ahead to Bulimbu because I want to talk a lot about that when we get there.
Yep.
But when you say they would come to us, was that your home? Where were those children going at that time?
So it was quite an adventure. We've been in ministry since the year my mom got pregnant with me. So when we look back and when you ask that question, there are numerous different places along the journey as the homes grew. At first, it was just a soup kitchen in the capital city of Eswatini called Mbabane. And the kids would stay on premises at night, unbeknownst to us. It was just a day center at the time. But because of the risks of street life, we would have 13 guys pack into this tiny guard shack that was on our premises. And when we discovered that, along with a few more really painful stories, we recognized like it wasn't okay just to be a day center and to provide a very real need, which was food and clothing and clean shower. Safety, but just during the day at the time. And so the real danger was at night for the kids. And we had to resolve that issue. And so when social welfare asked us to take in our first child, and social welfare is the government department responsible for care of vulnerable kids in Eswatini, how could you say no, right? So we started renting homes in the capital city, and home after home, we had to expand and ultimately ended up buying a farm. And I lived on that farm with 60 other kids. And so what that looked like was my family had a house in a string of houses, and the home to our left and to our right was filled with 8 kids with a parental unit in that home that were employed to be the mother and father, or in some cases just the mother to these kids. It was a great life, man.
Now, how much intentional focus and time did you get with your parents at that age then, if they had all that going on?
Oh, man. That's one of the things that I really honor my parents for. We've always been a really busy family, because all through that season, my mom was a full-time dentist. She was the one who was,
Okay.
So she owned
I think there's going to be some things. I obviously know his story well, but I didn't know that one. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's the fun of doing this thing, man. There's going to be things we learn about each other. So she owned her own dental surgery, and amazing mother, because she would only work during the mornings when she would drop my sister and I off at school. She would go to work. At the same time, my dad was running like 90-hour weeks, launching the ministry and taking care of kids and building families and all the rest. And so he was out running all the time. And when we all came back into the house as a family at night, we would all be talking ministry stuff. But the thing was, we were all in it together. So in terms of intentional time with family, that's the one of the many things that my parents really did well, was invite my sister and I into the work, so that it wasn't they're off doing their thing and we're just their kids. It was, we're their partners in the work, and whatever we're doing, grab a chair, grab a cloth, get working. Now, not every day did I enjoy that.
That's what I was going to ask you that. Was there ever points, even as a child, that you were like, not in the sense of that you didn't know any better, or did you? Did you have anything to compare it to, whether it was friends or something you saw in movies or whatever, to think like, this is a lot different than the typical child's?
You know, yes, lots of friends outside of the ministry as well.
People that came to visit.
Visitors, but also just people who lived locally that were my school friends, or I made friends in sports. I used to swim a lot, and then later rugby in South Africa. So in many ways, I had a very normal childhood in terms of the other kids that I would interact with. Yes, there was my whole family environment, which was orphan care focused, ministry focused, street kid, drug rehabilitation, the whole gamut of care. But then in my school life and in my sports, it was very normal. So, I knew.
So the kids that you were at school with, the kids you did sports with, they had the typical family home environments.
Yeah.
So that being the case, when you were at home and you were around all the kids that were a part of the orphan care, what was your dynamic like with them? How did you mingle with them? What did it feel like? Did it feel like brothers and sisters? Did you feel like an obligation to treat them a certain way? Like how did that transpire?
Yeah. So I think where my parents really did a good job was helping my sister and I know the stories behind each child in care.
So you have empathy.
Yeah, exactly. When you understand someone's story and how brutal it has been, it gives you a huge heart for the situation. And so, look, the kids didn't all live in my house. It wasn't a massive house with 60 kids. These were each independent homes with maximum of 8 kids per home. So I guess I would say it was more like having cousins than siblings.
Sure.
But they were very much a part of the family. So come Friday night, we sit down in our lounge to watch a movie, just my core family. So my mom, dad, sister, and myself. And we're watching a DVD back when DVDs were a thing.
Sure.
Man, I can even remember VHS because
VHS.
We had those growing up. Africa's always like 10 years behind. But
I had VHS growing up.
Hey, there we go. Making me feel better.
All the Disney VHS. Oh, I loved those. We had a big cabinet where the big box TV was with the little VHS feed in the bottom of it. That was when the VHS started to be built into the TV instead of it being a separate VCR.
Yeah. Hey, we're aging ourselves here, so we gotta.
That's true. But I remember loving just sitting there on the ground as a kid and looking at all the different covers. Yep. I can remember how they. I'm weird. I can remember how they smell. Even I'm just.
So that's a great picture. Take that snapshot.
Yeah.
And that's what our living room looked like. There were just cabinets of VHS and DVDs, and so we would watch. We would have family movie night with just our family, but every 5 minutes there'd be a knock at the door, and it would be one of the homes in the string of homes looking for their family movie night, because all the households were doing the same thing. And so we would never make it through an entire movie without being interrupted.
And that never bothered you?
You know, sometimes it's a little bit annoying, but...
and I'm not trying to be overkill with these questions. The reason why I'm asking these is because there's a purpose to it. Because I see how much of this has shaped who you are. And we're really going to get into that later. But right now, that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, no, you're setting the table. I appreciate the questions. And no, it didn't. Look, I'm not perfect. I'm not a saint. And the reality is there are times it was frustrating. But we always understood what was going on. And we were all about it. So we intentionally stocked up with DVD supplies so that we could share our DVDs with everyone around us. And we were essentially the library for it. And that just is what happens when you have a resource you have to control. So no, it was such a privileged childhood, and being able to walk through, because not only do you see like the pain and the beginning story of these kids, you get to experience the joy of who they become while they're becoming that beside you. And so there are the tough days where a child who's experienced trauma and is working through that trauma may react poorly to certain things, may reciprocate that trauma to others. And so, yes, you get burned once in a while. But those were always opportunities. And again, my parents did a phenomenal job of sitting my sister and I down and saying, okay, that happened. Let me explain why. And I think that really framed my perspective of how I see the world, not just the kids I grew up with, right?
Mm-hmm. So you got to see the process taking place. Mm-hmm. A comparison that I give to that, and I'll make it about myself for the sake of, just in case anybody thinks it's an inappropriate comparison for the children. But if you've ever seen where like a rescue would choose a rescue dog. Like, for example, there was a dog just down the street from our house not too long ago, and I got out of my truck and I tried to save it, and it took off running in the desert. And I was like, I'm not going to tell my wife about this because I was unsuccessful in my mission of saving this dog. And it bothered me big time because I was like, where it ran out in that desert,
there's no hope for it.
Good luck, buddy. And at night we have just huge packs of coyotes that come through there hunting and everything. And this was a pretty bougie dog. Like, it was definitely someone's dog that was not going to be conditioned for the wild. So I was like, oh, that kills me. But I'm going to keep that one to myself. And later that day, my wife calls me and she's there's a dog. And I'm like, no way is this the same dog. Long story short, her mom had found it. Then they're all after it. They send me after it again. We're unsuccessful again. They're all crying.
Man.
Some lady was able to convince the dog to come into her backyard. And then my wife starts working all these Facebook chat groups and all this stuff. And now that dog belongs to her parents, my in-laws. When that dog was first in their home, even though it was in a safe environment, after what it had been through, the trauma that it had been through and everything, even though it was now safe, it was so skittish. Mm-hmm. It was still in that fight or flight protective mode. And then I don't go to their house super often. So, you know, whether it's 6 months or however long it's been, you go back, you can start to see that safe environment that they have been in for a consistent amount of time. They start to become who they used to be again. And I've used that analogy for myself with different guys going through different traumas or things like that, where they kind of get frustrated with how long the process is taking. And you can't oftentimes speed up the time that it's going to take
rush the process.
Exactly. And so you and that's why I said I want to make sure no one thinks I was comparing them to dogs.
Yeah, no, but it's a great example, right? We are all that way. I am that way.
Exactly.
You are that way. We all experience trauma, and that trauma informs how we see the stimuli around us. Mm-hmm. And so when we get triggered with a stimuli that is similar to that of what existed when the trauma occurred in our lives, we react a way, whether it's shutting down or getting aggressive, maybe it's getting loud, maybe it's getting silent.
And so here you are at a young age, and because your parents were actually intentional about explaining to you what you were seeing and what you were witnessing, you started grasping and understanding those things way ahead of what most people are going to. So then you go to boarding school, am I correct?
That's right. So 8th grade, so different to American school. There's no middle school. 1st grade through 7th is primary school, and then 8th through 12th is high school. So imagine 13 years old, you go off to boarding school, 13 through 18.
Was that hard for you to leave to do that?
I was so excited.
Really? Why? Is that okay to ask? Why?
No, it's fine. Yeah. I think it's a cultural nuance. So first of all, my parents had really built up my sister and I that when we turned 13, we were adults in their eyes. And so they took the first, the year prior. So when we turned 12, my mom and dad each independently would read us books and work through curriculum that was what they felt was important to bestow in us that we would then take into our adulthood. Or see in ourselves when we look in the mirror and who we're supposed to be. And so that was like the training ground ahead of being launched off into boarding school, which was great because I really needed it in terms of how do I make decisions and then take ownership for the decisions that I had made. Now, in South Africa, like it's super normal to go to boarding school because the good schools can be few and far between. And so you send kids, when you live a little more remotely, you send your kids off to a boarding school. So there's excitement around it being like a normal thing to do. For me, I wasn't a huge academic, so the idea of being able to play competitive sports in the South African school system was what really excited me.
What was your sport?
I went in with it being swimming, and then it quickly became rugby.
Okay.
That's why my nose isn't straight anymore. But yeah, great way to make friends.
And you were there, so started at 13 all the way to 18?
Yep. 13 through 18. So it's essentially 8th grade through 12th. Graduated, and in between, right, it was 2.5 hours down the road, so I still got to go home. It wasn't like I was never seeing my parents, and when I would play,
I had always pictured it that way. I always pictured that you rarely got to see them. Okay,
it wasn't isolated. It was great. My parents made a huge amount of effort to show up in that season, and when I'd be playing,
would they be able to come to the rugby
matches? If they were home games, they were always there. If there were away games and they were close enough, they would come. But when we really traveled, then it's impossible. No parents could go.
So we've established that during those childhood years before you went to boarding school, the values, the lessons that they had already been instilling in you. How did that process either continue, or did it differentiate, or did it go backwards when you then went to boarding school?
Great question. So jumping into boarding school was definitely a culture shock. If you imagine like living in a high care, high compassion environment, high moral basis, biblical basis, where scripture is a part of everything we did in Eswatini, and God was reflected on daily. And then you jump into a very humanistic boarding school environment where you've got 18-year-olds in the same wing as 13-year-olds. And so
that's a big gap at that age.
Huge gap developmentally and hormonally, and even just like how tall is a 13-year-old when they stand up against an 18-year-old. So you get all the things, the bullying. You also get the good things, like the guys who you look up to, the guys who are more advanced in sports and are more like role models. And then you get a lot of the naughty stuff. Like the sexual stuff, as kids are exploring their worlds. And so definitely had some massive challenges in terms of, okay, I've been taught all these morals and taught this faith base and really believe it at the core of who I am, have a relationship with Jesus, walking with him. But now I'm trying to work out, how do I do that in a cultural context where suddenly it's not cool to be a Christian? It's certainly not normal to not be accessing pornography or to be passing it around the dorms. Like that was a done thing, and I wasn't subscribed to that. And so I was confronted very quickly by being called names, being branded as the gay guy because I didn't have a girlfriend and wasn't passing around porn. That isn't my attraction, and so I was locked in this place of I know who I want to be, but that's really difficult in this environment.
Now, was it specifically because you were a Christian, or would it have mattered even if you were Islam or Buddhist? It was just that you weren't going with the norm, or was there actually prejudice against you being Christian?
It really was just because you had a value
compared to what everybody else was doing. Yeah. What's really cool that I'm seeing right now, and which is nice to say about a social trend, because unfortunately most of them don't have a lot of redeeming value. But one of the ones that I'm seeing right now is there is a lot of content coming out talking about why someone should stop looking at porn. And it's not even from Christian or religious organizations.
It's scientific.
It's scientific because of what it does to your brain, your endorphins, and your relationships, and even your anxiety and hormone. I mean, all kinds of different things. And so what's cool is that it syncs up morally, but there's actually now a push back against that trend that was so prevalent for so long. And I feel like now, because science is behind it, that it's less of feeling like you're swimming upstream against the norm. And now you're doing something that's now considered good for you by doing that less.
Yeah, I'd say it's still not popular because porn is so pervasive in our culture.
I wouldn't say it's popular. Like, the trend is really, like, right now on Instagram specifically, there are tons and tons and tons of very big, in podcasts, very big names that are outspoken about this right now. Mm-hmm. And so I would actually say it's popular. But what I think you're saying, and I agree with you, is it's not popular enough that it's diminishing how rampant and how big that industry is.
Yeah, how pervasive it is, because it's addictive, right? So there's a hook that's driven quite deep. And it's really cool that science is catching up with the Bible. And I think the core principle there is God doesn't ever tell you not to do something that is fundamentally good for you. God wants what is good for you.
I love that you just said that, because I feel like even me at certain points in my life, it felt like these are just random old rules that aren't applicable anymore. And then it was kind of like, I'm going to justify what I do and don't do based on my interpretation of what I think is now applicable today. And the more you study it, the more you actually do see that these aren't just random things that God put in place just for the sake of us having to follow it, or just because I said so. There is a purpose to our benefit behind every single one of those things.
Yeah, I mean, you go through the Old Testament and there's a myriad of laws, right, that get put into place. And you go one by one, and there's great purpose behind them. Now, Jesus comes and satisfies the law, right? So we're not living out a practice of living under the law. Because God's grace.
Yeah, you're not obeying
us.
These laws now for your salvation.
Correct. Yeah. But the principle of, even take something that we wouldn't practice today in our faith walk, like the Israelites being called upon not to eat pork or shellfish, right? That was an interesting difference. But if you go back and you begin to study, there's been some more recent studies that have tracked the Israelite bloodlines. And so done on Jewish people today, and they found a trend that the bloodlines that show the ties back to the Israelite nation have a high cholesterol correlation. And so actually, if that population had engaged in those protein sources, those are high cholesterol issues that would have precipitated from consuming those things.
Wow.
So there was purpose to it. It wasn't just, hey, I am God and I'm going to give you these rules to prove that I can tell you what to do and you got to do it. We don't like rules, but when we begin to navigate the world from an understanding of, oh, God asked me to do the things that are good for me. So I'm going to respond both in faith and honor to him, but also in pursuing the things that are good. And so I wasn't perfect in boarding school.
So, but that intentionality of your parents was your lighthouse.
Yeah.
And it kept, whether even you strayed a little here, different, it still kept you centered and moving in that direction. Okay.
Exactly.
So at that same time, your parents are still operating the orphan care. How are we getting to Bulimbu? Where does that transpire? Because that's what I want to talk about next.
Okay.
My name is Jacob McLaughlin, and I'm the founder of New to Medical Device Sales. Medical device sales is the selling of medical equipment to hospitals, surgeons. They're actually in the surgeries, and the average rep's going to make around $177,000. And what we've been able to do is help people break in about 8 weeks at around $100,000 starting out in the industry. It usually is 5 to 7 interviews, 6 to 12 weeks long in the interview process, and they go up against thousands of people. But that's because you are going to be working with some of the smartest human beings, such as surgeons. You're going to make over 6 figures. You get your car paid for, all your gas paid for, and all your travel paid for. We've been able to help over 2,000 people do this in the last 2 years. Not only do we help people break in to make a difference and change other people's lives, they also get to change their lives. If you're interested in helping people and you're interested in financially becoming free, we can definitely help you. And I think you should check out New to Medical Device Sales, our podcast, while you can also click the link where you guys can learn more about what we do at New to Medical Device Sales. I absolutely love Brenton. I thank him so much for what he's doing for all of you, and I hope you guys keep enjoying the episode.
Yeah, so Bulembu happens really before I go off to boarding school. Just a couple of years before that.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so 2006, I was 10 years old, and that's when we executed the purchase of Bulembu. So for those who don't know what Bulembu is.
Yes, and that's what I want to talk about now. And that's actually why. So I've been very intentional about the first three people that I've had on this show. Jacob being the first one, it's the sponsor of this show, and the conversations that we have had over the last, I can't believe it's almost been 2 years, about balancing being very driven individuals when you have different energy sources, whether they're anger and different things, of how to let go of what could be a driver in a lot of ways, but also toxic. You know, we've had very similar. So it was just, that's a lot of our conversation that we had in the first episode. So he's part of the foundation of this show. Having Mitch on here last week, this is his building, and you know, just the conversation we had in place, and him talking about his life experiences and kind of some of the similar things that his parents instilled in him, that didn't create this comparison mentality or scarcity mentality. And then that's what we're going to start kind of getting into with our main discussion after we get through Bulembu with you. But with you, this is the other foundation of why I'm doing this show. Is this is a big part of the mission of being able to bring awareness to things like this, living outside of our little bubble, that I would be a hypocrite by accusing anybody else of doing something that I haven't done myself time and time again, or catch myself doing. And that's being in this self-fixated bubble of what makes me happy, what makes me feel better, what makes me comfortable, what makes people respect me. Even when you don't want to do it, you still catch yourself slipping back into that. And so I'm having to be very intentional about getting involved with things. We'll talk about push-ups for poverty later. You've been a major instrumental piece in my life, and someone I've learned a lot from, about how to do just that, of getting out of your own little bubble, of always thinking about your life, or even just the bubble that goes around the people that you care about, your family. And in a sense, it's still a reflection of you, your ability to provide or things like that. And to really say, my heart is to serve. And we talked about that. I said that to Mitch last week. And you and I have talked about it before. John Maxwell, he talks about, like, it was one of those CCV services where he was saying, if you see someone sick, you want to heal them. If you see them broken, you want to fix them. But if you see value in someone, you want to serve them. So really, truly having a servant's heart and seeing value in everyone around you, not just the people you like, or specifically the people that like you. Mm-hmm. You know, Jesus talks about that's easy. Where's the challenge in that? But to serve someone who you don't necessarily like, but then take it a step further, you know doesn't like you. That's where the rubber really meets the road. Exactly. And so what you guys have been doing now for so long, not just in that village, but on a worldwide scale, but let's talk about what you've been doing in that village now. Yeah. I want to, as you talk, there's a couple of things that I want to really hit home on, that why I've been so enamored by it ever since you first told me about it, that I think is very special about how you guys do things. But I want to let you talk about it, because you're going to do so much better of a job. Oh, thanks, Brenton. And yeah, I think the idea of getting outside of our bubble, it has its basis in empathy, right? So that's a word we've used earlier in our discussion. The power of understanding what is beyond your own experience allows you to have empathy for those who may be responding differently to how you expected they would. So if anything is beneficial from this discussion to your listeners, I hope it's a challenge towards empathy. I think it will be, because like I just said, and how much I've learned in being around you, I've always had empathy because of different things that's gone on in my life. But instead of it giving me a drive to teach other people to serve others, my empathy, if you want to call it that, looked like, I want to teach you how to be self-sufficient. I want to teach you how to be the man. I want to teach you how to never let anybody hurt you or tell you you're not good enough. And some of those things are good, but I did it in a way of, worldly success or anger or control or even putting fear, all those things. But where my heart's changing is I don't have to do all those things. And I really don't need to teach and replicate things to other people that actually truly was a poison for myself.
Yeah.
And so real empathy is, yes, having that compassion for someone that's gone through pain and wanting to help and serve others, but now for the right reasons.
Yeah, I would say at its core, empathy asks the question, can I get to know you? That is the highest call of empathy.
Without any self-serving motive at all.
I think that comes even before, can I serve you? I think it's, can I know you?
Great
and
point.
From that
you
comes
can serve better if you know them better.
100%.
Yeah.
So in our knowing of the orphan crisis in Eswatini, we were confronted with the reality that at the time life expectancy had dropped to 32 years old.
32.
Parents were just getting annihilated by the AIDS crisis. This was back before there was HIV medication. So imagine
or in general?
It was early adoption of antiretrovirals in the States. It had not been released to Swaziland yet. And so late 90s, early 2000s, in a polygamous culture where there wasn't a lot of sexual education, HIV, the first known case of HIV in Eswatini was 1989. By the late 90s, we had a massive death rate. By the early 2000s, we were the highest HIV rate, the country with the highest HIV rate in the world. And by 2003, 2006, in that window, the United Nations came in, did a survey in Eswatini and said, hey, if nothing changes, by 2030, there'll be no more adults in this country. And by 2050, there'll be no more people. And when you're dealing with that kind of a serious crisis, that's pandemic level. Now, we went through the global pandemic where it was serious, people died. I want to tell you that what it looked like and felt like in Eswatini during those years, not just 2-3 years, we're talking 10, 15 years of people just dying, was really tough. And we got a taste of it here in this side of the world. This isn't even the tip of the iceberg of what it looked like in Eswatini. So facing annihilation of a nation because of this HIV virus that then gave AIDS when it was undefended against medicine. We couldn't just look after 60 kids. It wasn't good enough. By 2006, there were 10% of the population. So in our context, that is 120,000 orphan and vulnerable kids in a country of only 1.2 million people. The total population was in decline, dropped around 1 million people. Number of orphans just skyrocketed. In that season, you had 1 in 10 homes in any rural community child-led, average age 11 years old, 2 to 3 siblings in the household. And you have these really painful stories of a neighbor knocking on the door saying, hey, would you like this loaf of bread for your 4-year-old sibling? Yes, please. Okay, well, have sex with me and then you can have this. So not prostitution. This is not kids selling themselves at the street side knowingly. This is people taking advantage of minors who had no more parents. And so it wasn't good enough to have 60 kids in homes in care when we knew these stories were just coming in floods. And so 2006, we buy out this mining town. It was abandoned for years before we went in. And so had the privilege of flipping this town from being this desolate town to suddenly, all right, there's life in town, and this town exists now to create a self-sustaining community of care for these kids. And so started all these businesses to fund childcare, bringing family-style homes into that environment. So 1 caregiver to 6 kids. We run our own pre-primary school through 12th grade. We run our own sewerage grid, our own electric grid, everything you can think of in this beautiful, isolated town to care for orphan and vulnerable kids.
Did you model that after somewhere else that you had seen that done well?
No.
Okay.
There wasn't anyone we knew that was stupid enough to try to do what we did.
That, to me, I feel like one of the first things that pops in people's heads about if they're going to get behind and donate to something like this is, does the money actually go where they say it's going to go? Because how prevalent people siphoning management and fees or just blatantly taking it. But a layer of it that I think a lot of people don't necessarily get to, and that I wouldn't have unless you have explained it to me, and I've seen it firsthand now over the last couple of years with you, is when the organization, and their heart's in the right place, but everything is just backed by just donor, and the kids or the people are constantly having to just rely on donor. And there's never the intentionality of like what you guys do to educate and then also provide for them, the businesses, like you said, to be self-sustaining.
Yeah.
That's what creates purpose and self-esteem and hope for a future, that I'm not going to have to rely on handouts for the rest of my life, that this is going to help me right now, that I need this, but because of what I'm being taught and the fact that people actually love me and see value, they want to serve me because they see value in me, where they want to actually not just give something to me that, whether it's a surplus or it's sacrificial, great, but the time intentionality with these children and these people to say, there's something in you that I believe in you, and I'm willing to put my time, resource into that belief because I want to see who you grow into or what you're going to be down the road.
Yeah, it drives ownership. So the town's businesses have 2 functions. One is to generate revenue for the kids in care. The other is very much to show the kids and demonstrate for them right in front of them that we don't exist and we don't survive off of just being given stuff. Now, the reality behind the scenes is, yes, we do still today need those donors very much. Mm-hmm. We could not survive without them because it is really difficult to run a very high dividend model on businesses. Because think about your business, right? You make a profit, you don't suck that profit out, you leave it in there and maybe you take your salary, but you build the business with the revenue that you're bringing in. In our version of this, because we grew so quickly to need to care for so many kids, any profits that were being made were really getting pushed into care very quickly. And so it makes it hard for the businesses to grow and to sustain themselves through difficult times. So we've learned over the years how to balance that out.
I think there's a lesson, though, in that itself, too. It would be kind of like what I was trying to do before, to teach somebody, you don't need anybody else. You're the man. And saying, you're going to do hard work and there's value in you, and we're going to learn and roll up our sleeves and really do our part. But we're not too good to accept help and realize that we can't do all of this on our own, and that through God, or, and putting it on someone's heart to get involved or donate or whatever, now you're really attacking pride as well.
So it's a balance,
so
right?
They have confidence instead of pride.
Exactly.
And confidence in the fact that they're going to have somebody, whether they, in most, since it's Christian ran, these kids all have a faith-based outlook on most of it.
Yeah, at least taught from a faith base, right? Correct. The faith decision is up to every child. And we care for kids regardless of what they choose to believe. Mm-hmm. Our homes, we say we're faith-based, not faith-biased. And that means we will serve whoever comes through the door. We are unashamedly Christians, and that is ultimately why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. Because we believe we're honoring God by serving the orphan, the widow, the vulnerable.
It's not a control system, though, where it's like, you want help, then you're going to believe this.
Exactly.
Because that would be completely contradictory.
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
So anyway, in that environment, you have all these businesses to sustain childcare, and you've got to do this dance between what you're saying, this pride of ownership, and really taking control over the opportunities that God gives you and stewarding well, and then understanding like it really has been a massive investment from our partners around the world to get us to where we are today. And so by 2008, we realized, hey, this town strategy is great, but we would never be able to fit all the orphaned and vulnerable kids into the town. So we've got to get out to them. And so we started a community-based program called ICBC, in the community, by the community. And the methodology of transformation there is that our job is to go into the community, become the community, and hear the voice of the community and empower the community members to transform the lives of those around them. And our center of basis is the church. So we go in and plant a church, a pastor's home, a preschool. We train up a base of home-based healthcare volunteers. We call them our compassionate care team that go out and do over 7,200 home visits every year. And they're our indicator system throughout the nation to say, there's a child-led home over there, they need help. There's a sexual predator over there, we need to get him on lockdown. And, they identify areas of risk and areas of need for our team to be able to push a response to. And so within that strategy, our goal is to be within walking distance of every rural orphan and vulnerable child and family by the year 2030. And we're on track, man. By God's grace, who knows, we may hit it by 2027. We're building site number 39 now. But it's been so cool to be a part of this journey with this small nation. And we started back in 1997 with this tagline, Kingdom Transformation, One Life at a Time. And it was like this BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal that certainly wasn't achievable. How do you transform a kingdom? How do you transform an entire country? And you just start one life at a time and being faithful to the person in front of you to care for them, their needs, whether they're the most difficult drug addict off the street or a child who has been left vulnerable because of abandonment or orphaned by HIV and AIDS, or whether it's a girl who has been pushed into the trafficking rings. You be faithful to that person, respond as God would have you, and you just never know the impact of what your yes will bring years down the line in that life in front of you, but also in what that calls you to. Absolutely. As an organization. So yeah, really, really privileged to have been a part of that and continue to be a part of that.
So obviously we're sitting right here in Arizona, United States. How did you get your boarding school there to now being here?
Came to America for university. I thought I was just going to study business and take that knowledge back and implement it within our sustainability side. Ended up marrying the love of my life, Caroline, who grew up in Tampa, Florida. We met at university. So marrying an American meant that I needed to stick around a little longer. And that little longer is still today here in Phoenix, Arizona.
What was your first impression of America?
Of America? Well, remember, I had encountered a lot of Americans coming to visit.
Yeah, but still, I mean, when you come over here and you're fully submerged in it, there had to be some sort of...
Yeah, I had visited the States a few times before with my dad coming over.
The first time you came then, maybe not even when you moved.
Oh man, this story's too good not to tell then. Okay. You asked, so here we go. My cousins who were still, my uncle was working in the business that my dad had left to start the ministry. And I didn't get into it earlier, but my dad was working very hard, but not taking a paycheck. And so the only way our family survived was my mom being a dentist in that morning block of the day. And then she was just a rock star mom. She'd drop us off, go do her work, pick us up from school, and then she was mom. I still don't know how she did it, but that's how our family survived. My cousins came back from a trip to Disney World, and they had the trifold brochure and just showing us all these really cool pictures. And we ran to my parents and immediately were like, stupid kids. We didn't understand our financial situation. Being in ministry, we were just like, can we go? Look at how amazing this is. And my mom, in front of us, started crying. We didn't understand what was going on, but she went away, and my dad was with her, and I can remember her saying, we will never be able to give our kids that option. We can't afford it. And my dad, he's the ultra optimist and extremely strong faith. It's like, Helen, if God wants us to go, he'll take us there. Let's pray right now. And so they prayed, and my dad's like, Lord, if you want us to go, make a way. Simple prayer, nothing special about it. Within 7 days, my dad gets an email from Teen Challenge California. Now, our men's rehabilitation center is a Teen Challenge center, as part of the global network. And they had asked my dad to come and speak at a week-long conference in Riverside, California, at the most beautiful Teen Challenge I've ever seen. It's literally built into a castle. But the caveat was he had to bring his family, whom they would pay for the entire airfare and everything to come across to California. And then in the bottom of the email, he said, and by the way, Kevin, we are driving distance from all the big amusement parks. While you speak at the conference, we will be taking your wife and kids to every amusement park in the area. Man, I kid you not. It was one of those moments where I still today look back and I'm like, God really cares about the small things too. That
was a big moment for your faith.
Yeah.
And believing how God feels about you.
Yeah. He cares about the desires that we have. And I couldn't ever deny from that point on that there's a God who exists. Not only does he exist, he loves me and cares about me so much so that with compassion, he would give us this gift. They literally paid for our tickets into the park and then gave us money on top of that to buy food in the park. So we saved money coming to America.
We made money.
It was and then on the day that we went into Disney, they gave my dad off from the conference so that he could experience that with me.
Go with you?
So, man, I'd done all the amusement parks in California.
Yeah.
Just so amazing.
Something that I think is one of the things that I think is very unique about you, other than those socks that I just now noticed. Is that Stevie's face
That's
on there?
Stevie's face.
He's got his little baby girl. Get those. I just looked down. I saw a baby staring at me.
That was a Father's Day present. I love these things, man. Yep. Little cutie pie there.
How did I miss that until just now? But one of the things I was going to say that's so unique about you is I even see, and I know you well, but I think even somebody watching through a lens could see how much that moment meant to you, that whole experience meant to you, even just the way you communicated that, the look in your eyes and everything. You also have such a special way in the conversations you and I have had, how when God doesn't answer that prayer, that it doesn't shake your faith in how you do what you just said, that God really does care about you and love you.
Yeah.
How does that balance? How did that come to be for you growing up the way you did, seeing all the things you did, and then having little moments where he showed up for you in that way? I know that's probably a pretty loaded.
No, it's a great question. And
how? Because I think that's a lot of us. Because, when I'm outspoken on say my Instagram or something about my faith, I've had people message me and be like, but my kid died of cancer.
Yeah.
And I just can't get past it. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and my little girl passed away. And they're like, I don't want to hate God, but I do. And I want to believe God cares, and I want all these things. And I'm not asking you to have the perfect answer right now, but
no, and
you got a knack for describing at least how you conceptualize these things.
Yeah, man, those things are so tough. And if you're in that spot now, I think the most important thing to hear is actually just that God sees you and he knows that pain And whether he's answering the prayer that you're praying or he's answering it a different way, know that he's with you in it. I can't answer for why bad things happen, and certainly not for why bad things happen to good people. That's a product of the brokenness in our world, right? So how do we answer for this 11-year-old girl who's looking for the next meal, is praying to God for it, and the only opportunity she gets is this dangerous knock at the door with a loaf of bread, right? I don't have an answer for that. But what I know to be true, because I've seen it time and again, is no matter how painful the journey, God is always in it. And the story he can weave together from that pain is far more beautiful than a story that lives without pain. And I know that's easy to say. It's tough to live. But the reason why when we pray and I had a dear friend, I was praying fervently for the Lord to save this guy's life. He was on life support and God didn't. And it was difficult, but it didn't shake my belief that God was good, because I have seen him write a story from pain to triumph for so many people. And we look at the world so narrowly in terms of life is here and life is to be lived to the full here. And the full means have the most fun, have the most stuff. And I really just don't believe that's God's concept of what life's to be. I think that there is an eternity that is real. And I think us in situations where life on earth is sped up and cut far too short is painful, but it's painful for us who are left here. It's not painful for the person who sits in eternity. And I think if we get a deep, deep understanding of that.
I think that's where we've had the discussions, because as you know, that's something that I struggled with for a very long time, to the point I was angry enough at God, not to the point where I couldn't fully deny that he existed, but to the point that I didn't really want much to do with him, because it's just like, if he doesn't love me enough or the people I love enough to do what I feel should have been done in those scenarios, like, why do I want a relationship with him? And that's been a long healing process, painful one. And you've watched a lot of it. But that pain, more than anything else in my life, commonalities, successes, that pain is what has allowed me to relate with people on the deepest level. Yeah.
It's part of God weaving that story of redemption, right? And I found that redemption is never just for you. Like, he gives you the testimony to empower someone else's transformation.
Yeah.
And I remember us sitting, a year and a half ago in my office and crying together as we prayed prayers that were difficult to pray and specific in the outcome that we wanted God to answer. And he wasn't answering those prayers the way we wanted him to. But look where we are today. There's a story that is woven together here where your life is impacting the lives of so many because you went through that pain.
I've also discovered through this process, if you're familiar with the Bible, it talks about not being lukewarm in your faith. And whether it was in the school my parents made me go to or the churches or whatever, the way I'd always had that explained to me was more so because of, like, if you're going to be a Christian, then you need to be all in because that's like who God calls you to be or asks you to be. But even in that, like we were talking about earlier about the commandments or the rules that God's given us, this one was for us too. And the reason why I now know that is because if you are lukewarm, meaning you're kind of halfway and you believe that God is real, but not to the point where you're ready to live your whole life out of that perspective, it leads to pain. Because the only way that I could actually move past the disappointment of what I felt like God should have done in my life or in the lives of the people that caused so much pain. Like, for example, I have after losing my brother and father, I have an immense fear of losing my children. And that was something I shared with you that was crippling for me. Very high anxiety producing thing for me. And it's still something I have to submit to him all the time.
Yeah.
But where I'm going with this about not being lukewarm is, if I truly, truly believe he is the God of the universe and my creator, and he is who he says he is, then it's just like what you said a little bit ago. If something were to happen to my children or to my wife or to someone else I love, they are completely at peace. They are in the best possible place that they could ever be. And yeah, I'm left with the pain, and there's a fear of that pain because I've gone through it before. And there's not really anything like it. If any of you have ever been through losing your best friend, your brother, your mother, your father, your child, it's just like your heart's getting ripped out of your chest slowly, and there's just nothing you can do to make it go away. And it just takes time. And then even through that time, there's little triggers, whether it's a song or a smell or an environment that brings that pain back again and that feeling in your stomach. And so there's a fear of that. But I would much rather me have to face that again instead of the person that I love that I lost.
Yeah.
And so knowing that they're at peace and truly believing it and not being lukewarm, that allows me to live my life in a way that I have confidence, that I don't have to live in fear, that I can actually trust him. Like, I think there was a day we were on the phone and we were talking, like, and this is going to sound, so hanging with me, it sounds a little rough at first, but to even think like, well, God gave his son and that's why he loves us, but he knew he was going to give him back. So yeah, he went through pain, but like he knew he was going to give him back. And then I felt like God was like, well, but that's how it is for you too with your kids, if you actually trust me. Like you have nothing to fear, because if there was something to ever happen to those loved ones, they are with me. Yeah, you're going to have to deal with the pain, but I'll be with you in that. And eventually that won't be the case. You won't have to be going through that anymore. Yeah. So no, I'll never have the answer of why it happens, but at least when you're not lukewarm and you are all in, that's where the peace comes.
Yeah, I think for our family, all in has changed. Like, I think all in can sometimes feel like it means doing all these things.
Yeah, no, fully. And I would say fully submitting your heart and beliefs and surrendering all illusion. I call it an illusion because we really don't have control. We think we have control, especially if we have more money or more influence. We think and to an extent, we have a little more control, but you can't control if you walk outside or you just drop dead of a heart attack right now while we're talking.
Yeah.
The illusion of control.
So for me, all in means surrendering it all.
Exactly.
And understanding like, all right, my days are numbered. I don't know when I will die. God does. My bank account is numbered by factors I can influence but can't control. My wife's life, my child's life, from the moment Caroline got pregnant with Stevie, we had a decision to make when we found out. It's like, you're pregnant and you got to get through the first 3 months, because once you're through the first trimester, the probability of a miscarriage decreases drastically. And so you could be fearful of that first trimester. And then when you get through the whole pregnancy, there's the birth to get through. And you could be fearful that, man, birth is dangerous and you got to pray that God will protect this, and certainly do pray. But my point is that then the child is born and you're holding this beautiful little life that is dependent on you. And it feels so vulnerable that now we've got to worry about keeping this thing alive. And then the thing grows into a toddler and is bumping around, and you've got to worry that it doesn't get into the right cabinet and drink the wrong thing. And yes, you need to be responsible, but you don't have control. And so the question that we had to face was, at what point do we believe we surrender our daughter to God and his defining and sustaining power? Or are we just going to spend all of her life and our life worrying? Is it when she's 21 that we don't worry anymore? No.
Yeah, right.
Is it when she's graduated and married? And I mean, when does it stop? And I believe the lie from the world is that you can control all these things. Now, in an American context, that is if you have enough money. Many times that's the story we're fed, right?
Sure.
So we work so hard to control the outcomes, to control our family, to buy our way to a long, happy, successful life. And if we live a surrendered life, one that recognizes, all right, I didn't choose to be born, I was, and I will be a gift back to my Creator, which is, in our words, God the Father, right? And so if my very life is that, then everything I touch, everything I have should be that too.
So that kind of ties me into, we were talking about, I said the focus of living outside your own bubble, of not being so fixated on your own little bubble in life. So now you're talking about relinquishing control. So that's a big first step of it. Okay. And then this isn't the exact quote, but Tony Robbins talks a lot about, he says the quickest way to stop being depressed about your own life is to start serving others or trying to improve the lives of others around you.
Yep.
How do you relinquish control? How do you stop fixating so much on yourself and want to serve others, but yet live, because you live here in America, how do you live in such a competitive society and still be a provider? Like,
Yeah.
what does that balance look like to you?
Oh man, it sticks to you real quick. So you've got to be careful what you let in the door. Even in serving the children in Eswatini, whether it was in the context of me living here and trying to resource the work there, or living there and serving them, there's always the desire to control. And so the motivation just shifts when you recognize, all right, my life is to serve the Lord. Well, I could be so focused on serving the things of God that I forget to serve the God of the universe. And so if I am totally drawn into the need that is very real and painful, and I am devoid of a conscious practice of aligning my life daily with what he's called me to today, then I'm just the same as the guy who is waking up and chasing after money, because whatever it is, it's that thing that isn't God that we're running hard and fast after. So yeah, living in America, certainly the desire to buy things and have money to be able to buy those things is something I have to fight daily, because you have a wife and a kid and you want to be able to give them the things. In truth, like the reason why I wanted to study business was so that I could make enough money that I would never need to be paid by the ministry. Like that was my pride. Like we talked about those two balance, being self-sustainable and wanting to build an economy for care that was locally driven and owned. And the complement to that is what you got to be careful of, is pride. Anecdote is humility and being able to receive help. And so, yeah, it's not an easy road, but we've had to try and balance those. Be good stewards of what you have, and you can ask God for more, but live with what he's given you and find contentment in all things, right? Isn't it Paul who says, I've learned the art of being content, whether abased or abound? Those are just fancy old words for whether I have a lot or nothing at all. And if we can live in a place of that being true, man, it's so much more joyful. You come with me to Eswatini and you'll see some of the most joyful people you've ever met. And they live in the stick and mud hut with no bedroom, no lights. It's just a one room building with probably not enough food for 2 days.
I know I've told you this, and you were there, and I've told several people this. When you just said, come there and experience that, I have not been there, but when you brought those kids to my last facility.
Yeah, with a quiet tour. That was fun.
And they walked in there, and I remember him to doozy specifically. He came in wearing a black parka coat, sunglasses inside, like just locked down.
Yep.
And we started talking. And even though his story was completely different than mine, we had different pain points that we could relate on. And those sunglasses came off, and that jacket came off, and then
you guys started shooting hoops, and the walls really came down.
Yeah, and I just watched those kids ride the bikes in there, playing basketball, running on the treadmill in jeans because they had never seen one before. And they were so happy.
Yep.
They were so, and not, they weren't happy just because they were getting to do those things. They were already happy. They were enjoying those things, but they had a joy in them that I didn't have. And it was very convicting. And then at the very end, when they prayed, and they prayed for me, and they prayed for my family, and we're sitting in my building, and my life's far from perfect, but from, just for a comparison materialistic standpoint, what they were used to compared to what I have, the way the world keeps score, I had it so much better.
Yep.
But they were happier and had more joy than me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm never going to forget that. I will never, ever forget that, because when they prayed for me in that moment, I remember I started just crying because I realized how my priorities needed a drastic shift. My heart was there in a lot of ways, but it was so revealing in areas I still needed to die to myself.
Yeah.
Where I could continue to relinquish and be more sacrificial. I talked about it a little bit earlier, I alluded to it earlier, about this Push-Ups for Poverty campaign that we're doing. So I did talk a little bit about it if you follow my Instagram on my story not too long ago. But basically what we're doing is we're partnering with Josh, and there's a huge correct me if I get any of this wrong.
You're doing great.
Huge food shortage. We've got somebody that's donated the food. We need to raise the money for the transport, which the first increment is about $20,000.
Yep, to get 2 containers out.
And so we came up with this idea of there's different like marathons and different things like that where people raise money, run per mile, and running's not my thing. So I can do some push-ups. And I've got a group of guys that are wanting to be a part of this. And what's really cool is now it's not just here in my gym. It's going to be in my brother's gym. It's going to be in a couple other guys' hometowns in the Midwest and stuff like that. And they're getting some people behind them.
Awesome.
And so basically the way this is going to work, we're all accumulatively raising the money to go and pay for the transport to get the food to the kids and the people. But every $10 raised is equivalent to doing a push-up. So if we raise $20,000, we got to do 2,000 push-ups. That's not 2,000 push-ups each person. That's as a group.
But I'm very I reckon you could do 2,000 push-ups by yourself.
It would take me some time. We get her done.
I should sit on your back while you do that just to make it a challenge.
You would like that.
Yeah.
There's this quote that I want to read, and I don't even know who Beth Rivas is, so I don't know if that's a good person to quote or not, but I like the quote. So
couldn't tell you.
It said, "Power isn't control at all. Power is strength, and giving that strength to others." Now, whether you believe in God or not, or your religion, like, that's still beautiful. And what you define strength as, you're still giving that to someone else of where you find strength. A leader isn't someone who forces others to make him stronger. A leader is someone willing to give his or her strength to others that they may have strength to stand on their own.
That's beautiful.
I think that ties a lot into legacy. So this is a question I've asked Jacob and Mitch. How do you define legacy, and what do you want your legacy to be?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, thanks for taking on the Push-Ups for Poverty. That was a great idea, and I'm excited to see how many push-ups we can get through as a group, and to, more importantly, to see the food delivered in Eswatini. Man, just quickly there, food is important, obviously, for the nutrition, but a big part of this is before kids or family members can take antiretrovirals, which is the HIV medication, they have to have had a meal. And if you start skipping your pills because you haven't eaten, it can become drug-resistant HIV. And so that's why when we say meals are important to us, yes, feeding kids, feeding families, very, very important. And take it at face value. It doesn't need more explanation.
Yeah, but it has a whole other layer.
Yeah, there's a whole big strategy here to keep families together and prevent more kids being orphaned. So to everyone who gives to that, thank you so much. And I'm sure Brenton will drop the link below. Legacy, what a powerful word. I think oftentimes I see this determined by people as like wealth that they can leave behind. In my family, that's not what is going to be left behind. What will be left to me by my dad, and I pray someday I'll be able to leave to Stevie, and if God gives us other kids, is a deep sense of who we are in Christ and who he is in us. And the call we have, because both of those things are true. Like we don't only do what we do for God, we do it with God. And when you can do the things he's called you to, knowing how he made you to be, and he empowers you with his Holy Spirit to go out and do, man, you don't need a legacy of cash wealth to do that. You're founded in who you were meant to be. I think that's the greatest legacy any parent can leave to their child. I want to be known as a person who loved his wife, was always available to his kids, and loved them well, and served the Lord. And today what that looks like is running around America, doing the best I can to resource the work in Eswatini so that we can see that country changed within 1 or 2 generations. And I believe we can do it. The funny thing is, if we're successful, that will happen before I die, if I get to live a long and prosperous life, right? And so I've actually wondered, like, if Eswatini was completely transformed, what would I do? What would I do next? And so that's why I think those 3 things are important to me, and it's not limited to what Swaziland looks like, because I believe we can change it. I fully believe we can see that entire country filled with hope, filled with communities that love and care for each other and have education, have access to real economic opportunities, have strong, healthy families that have direct access to the undefiled gospel. And when we accomplish that, who will I be? Because just like I said earlier, if I spend my whole life making my focus that one objective, which is a godly objective, but if I make that my goal, I'm no different than the guy who says I want to have $1 billion for every child that when I leave this earth.
And now I get to brag on you a little bit, because what you just said is so unique. There was a phone call you and I had a couple years ago. I still remember that you were going to a major donor event, and you were praying before it, and you were sharing with me what you were praying. Sure, there was the prayer that God prepare their heart, put on their hearts who want to participate. But what proves, and I want to share this because it's so uniquely rare and beautiful. You actually live out what you just said of, I don't want my legacy to be like what I accomplished. Like, your heart is to do this because you feel God has called you to do it, but it's not your identity. And where the proof in that is, I remember you saying to me, I prayed that I would not be manipulative in this meeting, that I would pull on their heartstrings or try to shape the meeting to basically like convince them to give, that I'm going to leave it up to whether or not God puts it on their heart. I'm going to present the information, but I'm not going to do it in a manipulative way. I'm going to tell the story and just let God do what he wants with it. That's what I watch you do.
Thanks, man.
On a daily basis. unfortunately, there's a lot of whether philanthropreneurs or
Yeah, a lot of the fundraising space is highly manipulative.
or even just from the evangelistic pastors.
Yeah.
Their heart started out in the right place. And then it started to become about how many people they can get into their church and how much money they can raise. And, you know, Francis Chan talks about how he walked out on stage one time, I'll never forget it, how the lights are poison. Because so many pastors have stood in that same place and originally had a heart just to share God's word, regardless if it was 2 people or 2 million. But when those lights hit them, they started to wanted to articulate better, wanted to be seen as a good speaker, wanted to be able to attach their name to a number of how many people they've brought to God or how many people are in that service. And over time, they start to lose why they did it in the first place.
Yeah.
And I've watched you over the years.
Thanks.
You don't do that.
That's kind.
You don't find your identity in your ability to raise a certain amount of money or like, yeah, what you just said was incredible. You sounded like what some of our politicians need to sound like when they're talking about this country of what they believe can be done. Instead of just attacking each other, like let's actually focus on what matters. Don't even get me started on that. But
this is an election year.
Yeah.
So,
but you don't find your identity or you don't make it an idol of your ability to make that happen. What you're saying is, God, I feel like you've put this on my heart to be a part of this, but it's up to you whether or not you're going to do it.
that's the thing right there is whenever I believe that I have the power to do something, I always come up short. And so that reflection that I had is not from a place of perfection by any means. I get this wrong on a daily basis, and you can get so caught up in the work that it does become your identity. But time and again, what hits me in the face is like, I come up so short when it's on me to do it. Where I've seen success had is when God shows up. And so I want to live that out, and I pray that that's the legacy I leave, ultimately pointing my family, my kids, and anyone I come in contact back with the only thing that ultimately matters.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, we're a Christ-centered ministry, and we could distribute millions of meals every year, which we're doing already. But if we didn't have an opportunity to explain why we're engaging in this work, to point people back to Jesus, then we just sent a bunch of people to hell just a little less hungry. And that's not what we're about. We want to meet real needs because we believe that's what Jesus did.
He did.
He stepped into people's pain. He saw it. He knew it. He felt it with them, and he responded to it, oftentimes miraculously meeting that need.
That's how we live outside of our own bubble.
Yep.
Because that's what I want to finish with is 2 things. What you just said is how we live outside of our own bubble. But then it's fair to ask, like, you know, I live in Scottsdale and I work 9 to 5 and I make good money and I got a family. And other than me just donating to like something you guys are talking about, like how do I start dying to myself? How do I really step out of my own bubble? And for me, like I say this to you all the time, I need the dummy version. I need the meathead, most simplistic version of this possible. And what I'm learning is the way that I can start to step outside of my self-fixated bubble is the more I put my focus on God and truly just allow my purpose to be loved by him and to love him, that starts to take care of itself. Yeah. It starts to get really complicated when we start just trying to like identify super specific things. And there are things in your life that God he'll show you through that process as you get closer to him. But it keeps you rooted in doing it for the right reason.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the ways that you end up dying to yourself, another temptation in that is, I want people to see me that way. I want people to know the sacrifices I'm making, that my legacy is he was a great guy. He was sacrificial. He wasn't self-centered. He was a giver. But why? Why do I want them to think those things? Why do I, more importantly, do I need them to think those things? But if we're rooted in him and we're truly just doing everything for God, that'll take care of itself. But again, at the end of the day, it won't really matter if other people know.
Yeah.
Other people's approval or any type of gratification that we get from, somebody seeing the good thing we did, that can't be our motive. That's a nice little bonus that we can be thankful for if it does happen. But our root, our anchor, our lighthouse, like when I talked about when you were at boarding school, it has to be what your parents instilled in you at an early age. That's why I feel like I can watch you live in this society and walk the way you do. Your lighthouse and your way and your perspective was rooted in you in an age that even now that you've been taken from that environment and you're now in this environment, sending help there, it'd be still really easy, especially to the circles that you get put in with what you do, for this to start to really consume you and change you. And it hasn't.
Thanks, man.
Because your source remains constant. And you look to him constantly of how do I be loved by you and how do I love you more?
Yeah.
And the rest takes care of itself.
And the last one on that, so how do I be loved by you? How do I love you well? How do I love others well? Right? So there's nothing wrong with living in Scottsdale and having a highly successful commercial life. Like that is fundamentally good. Okay? But how do we live unselfishly in that context, loving God, loving others, and being loved by God? Now, if you're not religious, I'm not here to punch the Bible down your throat.
No.
I just want to tempt you with this. The challenge is, how do you live compassionately and unselfishly? We are told that we need all these things to be happy, and I promise you, they don't make you happy. You look at some of the minimalist movements that are going on around the world and how much happier people are as they're getting away from stuff. Step one is to move away from stuff, and not that you can't have nice things, but it's this innate drive for more and more and more. I have a friend, Josh Becker. He's the author of a book on minimalism. And so it's definitely worth the read if you find yourself caught in that place of the desire for more. And once you have pushed through the desire for more, how do you live now? So you're living unselfishly. How do I live compassionately? Because that means I'm driven to serve from a basis of empathy for my brother, for my neighbor that's on the other side of the world. You don't ever have to come to Eswatini to participate in the
there's
goodness.
plenty of opportunities in his room right outside this door. I mean, it's all around us.
Yeah.
There's pain all around us.
There's pain and poverty everywhere.
Yeah.
And you can participate in the redemption of others.
So that being said, to finish, you get a billboard. It has a saying on it. You can put whatever you want on it. It's got your name signed below it. And it's at the most traffic point. So when I told Mitch, it's right out here on the 101 Scottsdale Road. So wherever you want to place that, what would it say?
Oh, man. I really like what we just said. Love God, be loved by him, and love others.
Okay.
The rest takes care of itself. You see, if you love God, but you don't allow yourself to be loved by him, you're driven into works, which ultimately are empty. So you need the safeguarding of love God, but also allow him to love you and experience that. I had amazing parents, and so I felt their love, and that's a lot of why I am rooted in confidence of who I am as a ward, and then love others. Because if all we do is just understand how loved we are and enjoy loving God back, we can't love God without serving others.
No, because he constantly in his word teaches and tells us over and over to love others. So loving him is loving others. Exactly. Yeah.
And hey, if you gave me the backside of that billboard too, I'd probably put the URL challengeministries.us or US.
There we go.
And I would invite people to participate in the work we're doing in Eswatini, because man, oh man, I love what we get to be a part of. There we go. And I really believe in it. And I hope if you've heard us talk this whole time, I hope you're encouraged to believe that, yes, there's bad news out there. There are tragic stories, and there's pain and suffering everywhere. We live it daily. But if there's one thing that's true, is there's also a lot of good work being done. And from pain and suffering is coming testimonies of triumph. That's inspired by people like you who give and participate in push-ups for poverty and many different ways to make sure that people's needs are met, but not just that their needs are met, that they get to hear the one sustaining and empowering truth that God loves them and they can be loved by him too.
Amen. So check out challengeministries.org. And then I'll be talking more about push-ups for poverty on here, on this show, and also on my social outlets as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for what you do.
Hey, I love you, man. Thank you so much for participating in all that we do and being a friend more than anything else.
Absolutely, buddy.